The great Lady Beltane honors us with her presence. May she walk in the favor of Ishtar.
Picture this. You are 14. The air is thick with incense and expectation. Your body is draped in fine linen, a garment your family saved for seasons to afford. Your mother's fingers, trembling slightly as she pretends they are steady, tuck a wreath of jasmine and roses into your braided hair. Your father watches you with an expression you cannot quite name, a look that holds pride, yes, but also the solemn finality of a man concluding a necessary bargain. Your brother shifts his weight, eyes on the ground, impatient for this day to be done. All around you, voices murmur blessings. This day is for the goddess, they say, a day of divine honor, but you notice the older women stationed by the heavy cedar doors. They do not smile, their eyes slide away from yours, fixing on the distant horizon. They offer no reassurance. Before the sun dips below the great walls, a stranger you have never met will assess you, and his offering will decide your value in the eyes of heaven and earth. And you are told, repeatedly, that this is an act of mercy, this is grace. The temple gates loom ahead, sheets of bronze hammered so thin they gleam like liquid gold in the harsh afternoon sun. Beyond them, the ziggurat rises, a monstrous staircase of baked brick carved into the very sky, a ladder meant for gods, not for girls. As you pass through the gateway, the smells assault you, heady myrrh, the earthy scent of boiled barley and beer, the acrid tang of smoke from 1,000 oil lamps. Priests in plain white robes move like wraiths through the column shadows. Slaves, muscles corded and shining with sweat, stagger under the weight of baskets overflowing with offerings, dates, woven cloth, jars of oil. Somewhere deep within this labyrinth of stone and devotion, behind curtains saturated with the cloying scent of lotus perfume, a ritual waits for you. You do not know its shape, only its purpose, to transform you. A priest with hands as dry as parchment places a simple crown into your palms. It is not gold or silver, but a coiled rope, braided from hemp, rough against your skin. A crown for the holy, he intones, his voice devoid of inflection. Another man, a scribe with fingers stained blue from ink, etches your name onto a damp clay tablet with a sharpened reed. The mark is permanent. On a stone altar ahead, illuminated by a single shaft of light, a silver coin rests alone. It seems to glow with a cold, patient light. It is waiting. In a few moments you will understand why your parents brought you to this place. In a few moments you will understand why the massive temple doors, once shut, are barred from the inside. In a few moments you will learn that this ancient rite has very little to do with devotion and everything to do with ownership. This is not a fable. This was Babylon. A system so normalized, so ingrained in the fabric of society, that ancient historians wrote of it as plainly as they described market prices or building techniques. A system so disturbing in its implications that modern scholars still fiercely debate it, some arguing that the truth has been too dark for us to look at directly. By the time we follow a young girl like our story's protagonist into the shadow of that ziggurat, we will uncover the stark, transactional heart of Babylon's most sacred institution, and we will begin to understand why, centuries later, the world chose to cloak this truth in myth and metaphor, to forget the human costs beneath the glittering legend. If you are fascinated by the hidden corners of history, by the stories written between the lines of official records, then you are in the right place. Consider subscribing to Echoes of Antiquity. If this introduction resonates with you, a like helps more people find these narratives. As we journey back, I am curious. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Now, let us step across that threshold. Her name was Beltane. Let her name be the anchor for our story. Let it be a placeholder for the countless names pressed into clay and lost to time. Now, stand with Beltane at the innermost threshold of the Temple of Ishtar, goddess of love, war and fertility. She was not alone. Other girls lined the polished limestone corridor, a spectrum of youth and apprehension. Some, perhaps a year or two older, held themselves with a rigid composure that seemed carved from stone. Others, younger and smaller, looked as if they wished the intricate floor tiles would swallow them whole. The air hummed with a low chant from a hidden chamber, a sound that vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. A temple attendant, a woman with a face like a smooth river stone, handed Beltane a thin cord. "It is coiled, soft, braided from the fibers of the sacred date palm," the woman said, her voice a monotone recitation. "A crown for the holy." They placed it upon her head. It was not a diadem, it was a ring, unadorned, and it felt less like an honor and more like a gentle, inescapable pressure around her temples. Beltane smiled, a small, practiced movement of the lips, because every other girl was doing the same. To not smile would be to mark oneself. She was offered ritual foods, flat cakes of barley sweetened with honey, and a shallow cup of fermented barley beer, sweet and cloudy. She ate and drank. She bowed when instructed. She attempted to join the hymns, her voice a fragile thread against the booming chorus of the priests. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing centuries later, would describe this scene with brutal, alien simplicity, women sitting in a sacred precinct with ropes around their heads, men passing by to choose. Many modern scholars suggest he misunderstood, that he was an outsider applying sensationalist gossip to a complex religious rite. But the clay tablets excavated from the very dust of Babylon, they do not argue, they list names, they record payments, amounts of silver, measures of grain. They were administrative documents, written to count, to inventory, to balance a divine ledger. And in their dry economic language, they tell a story that chills the blood. This is the moment where the narrative of sacred devotion begins to fracture, revealing the transactional engine underneath. Beltane learned the business with a swiftness that stole her breath. First came the training, a whirlwind of instruction that had little to do with theology and everything to do with presentation. An older woman named Iltani, whose eyes held the perpetual sheen of quiet exhaustion, became her guide. There were lessons in music, how to pluck the lyre to create an atmosphere of serenity. Lessons in dance, slow, rhythmic movements meant to be hypnotic, not exuberant. They taught her the alchemy of perfumes, how to blend cedar oil with rose to evoke sanctity, how to use myrrh to suggest mystery. Iltani showed her the most crucial arts, the way to lower her gaze so it became an invitation instead of a refusal. The way to hold her body that communicated availability without words, the precise technique of rolling a polished cosmetic stone, a galena stone, over her cheeks and brow to bring a dewy, youthful sheen to the skin, a final gloss of preparation. A young scribe, a boy no older than Beltane herself, his fingertips perpetually stained with the blue-black of iron gall ink, carefully added her name to a list on a new tablet. As he wrote, he murmured the title that would now define her, Kadishtu. The word hung in the air. It meant sacred or consecrated one. From Iltani's faint, bitter smile, Beltane began to sense it was also a trap. The priests, in their patient, pedagogical voices, explained the theology. It was a logical, closed system. Ishtar was the life force of Babylon. Her vitality directly influenced the harvests, the success of births, the flow of trade along the Euphrates. To please the goddess was to ensure the city's survival. And how does one please a goddess of fertility? Through acts that mirror and encourage fertility. The logic was tidy, symmetrical, beautiful in its way. The human consequences were messy, asymmetrical, and far from beautiful. So, I ask you, if you were in Beltane's place, having been given this crown, taught these arts, and presented with this divine logic, would you call this devotion? Or would you, in the quiet of your own heart, start to recognize the outlines of a gilded imprisonment? It is easy from a distance of millennia to label the Kadishtu as priestesses. And by certain measures, they were. They were formally trained. They memorized lengthy hymns to Ishtar and other deities. Some of the most senior even learned the complex art of cuneiform, reading the sacred signs pressed into clay. They wore clean, fine linen. They dwelt within the holy precinct, a place of immense power and prestige. From the bustling streets of Babylon, looking up at the mighty temple walls, it undoubtedly looked like status, a life of privilege and divine proximity. The law, the famous Code of Hammurabi, even supported this illusion. It offered the Kadishtu certain explicit protections. She was entitled to a portion of the offerings she received, her wages, in essence. She had a legal standing that many ordinary Babylonian women did not possess. On the crisp clay of the legal tablet, she belonged to no single man. But in the lived reality, within the echoing halls of the temple, she belonged to the institution itself. The tablet recorded the transfer of goods and the fulfillment of duties. It never recorded the moment of consent, because in such a system, consent was not a legal category. It never recorded an exit strategy, because, for most, there was none. For a fleeting period, Beltane allowed herself to cling to the hope this narrative offered. Perhaps this was a path to a better life. Perhaps within these walls she could find purpose, respect, even a kind of power. The priestesses who moved with serene authority, their names stamped on administrative documents, seemed to embody a future she could aspire to. Maybe the temple, for all its strangeness, would be her protector. Maybe she could not just endure here, but thrive. That fragile hope withered quickly. The legal protections were just one layer of the story. What happened next, the daily and nightly rhythm of temple life, was the part the administrative tablets deliberately avoided describing. They recorded the fact of transactions, not their human texture. As dusk settled over Babylon, painting the ziggurat in shades of violet and shadow, the atmosphere within the inner courts shifted palpably. The great outer doors were sealed for the night, yet side entrances remained discreetly accessible. Men began to arrive, not as penitent worshippers, but as clients. Merchants from their faces often hooded. Soldiers back from patrols on the distant frontiers, still carrying the dust of the road. Travellers from Anatolia or Egypt, speaking broken Akkadian, carrying pouches of foreign silver or bolts of brightly dyed cloth. They did not linger in prayer. Their business was swift. They would pay, the clink of silver measured on a scale, and a priest, now acting as a solemn facilitator, would guide them through a maze of corridors to where low, woolen curtains divided the space into small, private enclosures. The Kadishtu waited there. The coins passed from the client's hand to the priest's, from the priest to the temple steward. Names were recorded in neat columns, the client's, sometimes the amount, the Kadishtu's assigned identifier. A portion, always the choicest cut of silver or the finest measure of grain, was set aside for the altar, the sacrifice that sanctified the exchange. The rest fed the vast, insatiable stores of the temple complex. This was the point where lofty devotion hardened into mundane, ritualized routine. This was the economic engine. Beltane watched one evening as an older Kadishtu, a woman who had been there a decade or more, finished with a client and emerged from behind a curtain. Her movements were economical, practiced. She walked to a side bench, sat, and placed a single silver coin in her lap, her gaze fixed on a middle distance, trained over years not to settle on any face or object for too long. No one in the courtyard shamed her, no one mocked her. In the city's eyes she had performed a vital, sacred service. She would be shown a kind of distant respect. And yet, her life's trajectory had been irrevocably narrowed. She would not enter into a marriage contract like other Babylonian women. She would not build a household in her own name, raising children who would care for her in old age. Her future, her social identity, her economic sustenance, her very body had been quietly, irrevocably shaped by the temple system without a single dramatic proclamation or act of violence. Some of the Kadishtu, especially those who had come from desperate poverty, called this a position, a step up. Others, in moments of stark honesty, called it survival. In her early days, Beltane simply called it the order. Her days were not chosen, they were assigned. A bell, its tone clear and cold, woke her at dawn. Her meals were determined by temple rations, barley porridge, dates, onions, occasional fish from the Euphrates. The names called out by the scheduling priest decided when she would serve. No one threatened her with a whip. No one locked her in a cell. The restraint was far more subtle and complete. Her time was not her own. Her person was not her own. A woman who cannot leave a place, whether by law, by economic necessity, or by profound social ostracization, is not staying there by choice. The bars on her cage were made of ritual, tradition, and divine mandate. At night, lying on her narrow reed mat, the smell of cheap lamp oil in her nostrils, Beltane would think of home. Not the grand theology, but the sensory memories, the smell of wet barley fields after the first winter rain, the feel of her mother's hands, rough from weaving, smoothing her hair before bed. She could still feel the ghostly pressure of the rope crown on her temples. She wondered, staring at the cracked mud brick ceiling, how long the temple's expensive lotus perfume could mask the deeper scent of human exhaustion. The clay tablets offered no answers to such questions. They simply recorded activity, and then, one day for each woman, they stopped. The names vanished from the active rolls. The story, as far as the institution was concerned, was over. Then came the practice for the greater festival, the New Year's Akitu. This was the most important event in the Babylonian calendar, a time when the gods were believed to reconfirm the king's right to rule and the city's destiny for another year. Central to this was the sacred marriage, rite, a symbolic union meant to ensure the fertility of the land, the abundance of the herds, and the prosperity of the people. Publicly, it was a spectacle of hymns, flowers, and grand processions, theology made visible and glorious. Inside the temple walls, the preparation was carried out with the precision of a military campaign. The Kadishtu did not perform this central rite, they were its essential infrastructure. They prepared the ritual space, the offerings, the costumes, and for Beltane, now initiated into the basic routines of temple life, her name was called for a new duty. A shallow bowl of precious scented oil cedar and frankincense was placed in her hands. Her hair was meticulously rebraided by silent attendants. The rope crown was brought out, inspected, and adjusted on her head. The air in the preparation room felt thick, charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Even Iltani, usually a source of cynical commentary, watched her with an unreadable expression, her silence more unsettling than any warning. "What must I do?" Beltane whispered to the overseeing priest. He answered with calm, rehearsed clarity, devoid of either urgency or threat. "You will do what the goddess requires to secure the year's fortune. It is a high honor." His words were a wall, offering no details, only finality. The inner chamber used for the highest rites was unlike the curtained alcoves. It was larger, dim, lit by a circle of lamps that cast leaping shadows on walls painted with terrifying, magnificent beasts. Stone lions with glaring eyes, symbols of Ishtar's power. In the center was a raised platform, draped in layers of the finest crimson and white wool, reserved for the ceremonies of state and ultimate faith. Beltane's breath caught in her throat. Her training had attuned her to nuance, to unspoken danger, and she felt it here, potent and shimmering, even beneath the sacred language. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed in the stone corridor beyond the only door. Not the shuffle of a common client, but the measured tread of someone of immense importance. A cold understanding washed over Beltane. Whatever was about to happen would not be a transaction recorded and forgotten. It would be a seal. It would brand her within the temple hierarchy in a new and permanent way. Not through overt violence, but through the sheer, weighty permanence of a rite woven into the destiny of a civilization. A low chant began, the priest's voices merging into a single, droning resonance that vibrated in the floor stones. The lamps seemed to burn lower. The curtain over the doorway stirred. Beltane, her legs moving as if of their own accord, stepped forward. She had prepared rooms. On this night, she was being prepared. Another figure already stood in the chamber, the high priestess of Ishtar. Draped in linen so white it glowed, edged with threads of real gold, she seemed less a human woman and more a living icon, composed, untouchably elevated, distant. Only the faintest, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands as she clasped them gave her away. Even she, at the pinnacle of this system, felt the crushing weight of the ritual. Beltane's task, she was motioned to understand, was to anoint the sacred space. She approached the lion-carved altar. The oil in her bowl was dark, viscous. She tipped it. The liquid spread across the stone surface, slow and gleaming, catching the lamplight like a pool of captured night. It was an act of consecration. The footsteps entered the chamber. The man chosen to embody the divine, sometimes the king himself, sometimes his highest official, crossed the threshold. His presence immediately altered the physics of the room, bending the very air toward him. Beltane kept her eyes lowered, as drilled into her 1,000 times, but she felt his gaze sweep over her, a physical pressure on her skin, assessing, claiming. The circle of priests tightened around the central platform. The chant deepened in pitch. The chamber itself seemed to contract, the painted lions on the walls leaning closer. Then a voice, the high priest's, cut through the drone. It was calm, certain, and utterly final. "Tonight, you serve the goddess in body and in symbol. The land depends on this. The city depends on this." It was a sentence polished by centuries of repetition, a sentence that presented itself not as an instruction, but as a cosmic fact, a sentence that, in its very phrasing, erased the possibility of refusal. The needs of the land and the city were paramount. The individual was merely the vessel through which those needs were met. Beltane lowered her eyes fully. The ritual, in its detailed, unrecorded sequence, began. What transpired in the heart of that ceremony was never written down. The temple scribes had no administrative need to detail the specifics of an act considered simultaneously sacred and secret. Only fragments survive in poetry, veiled allusions to a prepared bed, hymns praising a fruitful union that brought life to the field and womb. The official record is a blank space surrounded by religious metaphor, but the impact on Beltani's life was immediate and tangible. The morning after, the high priestess embraced her. It was not an embrace of affection, but of institutional approval, a stamp of validation. The priests who had previously ignored her now nodded gravely as she passed. A scribe added a special, wedge-shaped mark beside her name on the master tablet, a sigil of elevated status. Even Iltani looked at her with a new expression, a hard-won recognition now edged with a profound, weary pity. "You have seen the heart of the temple now," Iltani whispered to her later, in a rare moment of privacy. "And the temple," she added, her voice dropping even lower, "has seen all of you." No further explanation was given, none was required. In systems of total control, certain thresholds, once crossed, are understood to be irreversible. Your value is recalibrated, your role is redefined, you are now fully integrated into the machine. Life resumed its rhythm, but the rhythm had changed for Beltani. She moved from being a novice to a recognized participant in the temple's most critical functions. The daily chores, the nightly rituals, continued. She became adept at reading the subtle signs. Which merchant brought not just silver, but news from the outside world? Which soldier carried a volatility that required extra care? Which offering of spices still held the dry, exotic smell of caravans from the Indus Valley? She knew the specific sound a coin made when it landed in the brass offering bowl versus the clay one, a sharper ping versus a duller thud. She understood how swiftly the stewards would scoop them up, weigh them, and seal them in pouches headed for the treasury. An accountant, a bald man who spent his life bent over tablets, once told her she had brought good fortune during a particularly busy festival period. She accepted the praise with a bowed head, but her eyes slid past him to the open door of a storeroom, where she saw jars of grain stacked to the ceiling, bolts of linen piled like snowdrifts, and chests undoubtedly filled with silver. She understood then what his praise truly measured, her profitability, her efficiency in the sacred economy. What began to weigh on her soul was not the repetitive nature of the rituals, which could, in a way, become numbingly routine, but the haunting silence of the hours afterward. When the last client had left, when the incense had dissipated into the night air, when the final hymns had faded and the only sounds were the distant barking of dogs in the city and the sigh of the wind across the ziggurat's peak, that was when the temple felt most like a gilded tomb. That was when the future ceased to exist as a concept. No one spoke of later. No one made plans for when your service is done. The older Kadishtu didn't retire, they simply vanished. Their reed mats would be rolled up and stored or given to a newer girl. Their small personal possessions, a comb, a spare sash, a talisman from home would disappear. The space they occupied in the dormitory would be filled within a day. When Beltani, her heart pounding, finally asked Iltani where Nakti, a kindly older woman, had gone, Iltani simply reached out and touched Beltani's hair, a gesture both tender and despairing. "She has gone to the goddess," Iltani said, her voice flat. But her eyes, locked on Beltani's, told a different, more terrifying story. They spoke of an ending that was not celestial, but quiet, unmarked, and utterly consumed by the institution that had used her up.